Bleak, dystopian, an absolute nightmare, to be honest with you. That's just my interviewing techniques.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the movie Blade Runner 2049.
Cheer up.
Well, you know, it's a bit of a bleak day.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's a lovely day in London, and let's keep it that way.
I'm sorry.
This is not the introduction we were promised. Bring me on with a little happier music. You know.
On July 13th, 1942, in Chicago, a future Hollywood icon was born, Harrison Ford. But nothing about his early life suggested global fame. His mother, Dorothy Nittleman, was a former radio actress, while his father, Christopher Ford, worked as an advertising executive. On paper, it was a stable, middle-class upbringing. In reality, Ford later described himself as quiet, withdrawn, and socially awkward. In 1960, he enrolled at Ripon College in Wisconsin. Ironically, acting was not a passion-driven choice. He joined a drama class simply to boost his grades. At the time, he was struggling academically and needed an easy credit, but something unexpected happened. The stage gave him confidence, a sense of control he'd never experienced before. Still, Ford wasn't a standout. He wasn't the best actor in class, nor the most charismatic. In fact, many saw him as average at best. In 1964, without graduating, Ford moved to Los Angeles with his wife, Mary Marquardt, chasing the Hollywood dream. What followed was not success, but rejection. He signed a contract with Columbia Pictures, yet the roles he received were insignificant. In one of his earliest appearances, he played an uncredited hotel clerk. No lines, no impact. Studio executives didn't sugarcoat their opinion. One reportedly told him bluntly, "You don't have what it takes." By 1968, Ford had effectively quit acting. With a growing family and no stable income, he turned to carpentry. What started as a survival job quickly became a serious profession. He became skilled enough to work for high-profile clients, including Brazilian musician Sergio Mendes and other Hollywood insiders. And this is where the first real twist in his story begins. Ford wasn't discovered in the traditional sense. He stayed close to the industry, just not as an actor. While working as a carpenter, he met filmmaker George Lucas. At first, their relationship was purely professional. Ford was building cabinets and installing doors, but Lucas noticed something unusual about him, a natural, unforced presence. Soon, Ford was invited to help with auditions, not as an actor, but as a reader, someone who would deliver lines so other actors could perform. It was supposed to be temporary, background, invisible, but he stood out. In 1973, Ford landed a small but meaningful role in American Graffiti, directed by Lucas. The film was a success, and while Ford wasn't the main star, it marked the first time Hollywood began to take him seriously. Still, he remained on the edge, not quite in, not fully out. Then came 1975 to 1976. George Lucas was developing a risky, unconventional project, Star Wars. At the time, it wasn't the cultural phenomenon we know today. It was a gamble, a strange space opera that many in the industry doubted. And here's the key detail. Ford was not the first choice. He wasn't even supposed to audition seriously. He was brought in again as a reader, helping other actors test their roles. But something happened during those sessions. His delivery, casual, confident, almost indifferent, gave the character a life no one else could replicate. That's how Han Solo was born. A smuggler with attitude, a reluctant hero, a character that would redefine Ford's life forever. But this breakthrough came with a hidden cost, because from that moment on, Harrison Ford would no longer just be an actor. 1977 changed everything. When Star Wars premiered on May 25th in Los Angeles, no one, not even George Lucas, fully understood what was about to happen. The film became a global phenomenon almost overnight. Lines wrapped around city blocks. Fans returned to theaters again and again. And at the center of this cultural explosion stood a character who wasn't even meant to be the hero, Han Solo. For Harrison Ford, it was the breakthrough of a lifetime and the beginning of a lifelong paradox. Unlike co-stars Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, Ford brought something different to the role. He wasn't idealistic or theatrical. He was grounded, cynical, almost dismissive. That realism made Han Solo feel human in a world of fantasy. and audiences connected instantly. But success came fast, and with it came pressure. Behind the scenes, tensions began to grow. Ford reportedly grew frustrated with the dialogue, once telling Lucas, "You can type this stuff, but you sure can't say it." It wasn't just a joke. It reflected a deeper disconnect between the actor and the material that made him famous. By the time The Empire Strikes Back entered production, Ford was already questioning his future with the franchise. Unlike other cast members, he had not signed a long-term contract. This gave him leverage, but also created uncertainty. One of the biggest behind-the-scenes intrigues. Ford wanted Han Solo to die. He believed the character's arc should end with sacrifice, giving emotional weight to the story. But Lucas disagreed. From a business perspective, Han Solo was too valuable to lose. Merchandise, fan loyalty, and brand identity all depended on him. This conflict reached its peak during Return of the Jedi. Negotiations were tense. Ford eventually agreed to return. But without the creative outcome he wanted, Han Solo survived. And with that, the trap tightened. Because while Ford was becoming one of the biggest stars in the world, he was also becoming permanently linked to a role he didn't fully believe in. But then came a second transformation, one that would complicate his career even further. In 1981, Ford starred in Raiders of the Lost Ark, directed by Steven Spielberg and produced by Lucas. The character? Indiana Jones. Another iconic role, another massive success, and another identity that would stick to him forever. Set in 1936, with scenes spanning from Peru to Cairo, the film combined adventure, history, and charisma in a way audiences had never seen before. Indiana Jones was fearless, intelligent, but also flawed. And once again, Ford's natural style made the character unforgettable. But here's the problem. Now he had two defining roles, two global icons, two shadows. Throughout the 1980s, Ford tried to break free. Films like Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott, showed a darker, more complex side of his acting. As Rick Deckard, he explored themes of identity, humanity, and morality. Initially, the film underperformed. Critics were divided. Studio interference, especially the forced voiceover narration, became a point of controversy. Ford himself reportedly disliked the narration and resisted recording it. Over time, however, Blade Runner became a cult classic, but at the time, it didn't help him escape typecasting. That's the irony of this phase of his career. Every attempt to prove his range was overshadowed by the roles that made him famous. Even when he succeeded, like in Witness, which earned him an Academy Award nomination, audiences still saw Han Solo, still saw Indiana Jones. By the late 1980s, Ford had achieved what every actor dreams of: global fame, box office dominance, cultural immortality. But behind that success was a growing reality. He wasn't just playing characters anymore. By the early 1990s, Harrison Ford faced a critical turning point. He was no longer just a rising star. He was an established global icon. But the question was becoming unavoidable. Could he exist outside of Han Solo and Indiana Jones? Instead of running from the problem, Ford made a strategic move. He leaned into a different identity, the serious, grounded thriller lead. In 1992, he starred in Patriot Games as Jack Ryan, a CIA analyst, pulled into international conflict. The film, partially set in London and Ireland, dealt with terrorism, politics, and moral ambiguity. It was a major success and proved Ford could carry a film without relying on fantasy or adventure. He reprised the role in Clear and Present Danger, further solidifying his image as a thinking man's action star. Then came 1993. The Fugitive was released on August 6th and became one of the defining films of his career. As Dr. Richard Kimball, a man wrongly accused of murdering his wife, Ford delivered a performance driven not by spectacle, but by desperation and restraint. Filmed across locations like Chicago and rural parts of the U.S., the movie became both a commercial and critical success. Behind the scenes, however, there was tension. Director Andrew Davis allowed Ford significant creative input, but the production was chaotic. The script was incomplete when filming began. Many scenes were improvised. Ford reportedly pushed for realism over dramatization, which led to clashes on set, but ultimately improved the film. This period marked a subtle but important shift. Ford wasn't just acting anymore, he was shaping the films. But with greater control came greater scrutiny. In 1997, Ford starred in Air Force One, playing the President of the United States. The film was a massive hit, reinforcing his image as a figure of authority and moral strength, but critics began to notice a pattern. Ford was no longer transforming into characters. Characters were being built around him. At the same time, his personal life began attracting attention. By 2009, Harrison Ford was no longer just a movie star. He was a legacy figure, the kind of actor whose past roles mattered more than his current ones. Hollywood had changed. Superhero franchises dominated the box office, younger actors took center stage, and the industry moved faster than ever. For Ford, the challenge was no longer becoming famous. It was staying relevant. And for a while, he struggled. Films like Morning Glory and Ender's Game showed flashes of effort to adapt, but they didn't redefine his image. And critics often pointed out that Ford seemed distant, even uninterested. His performances were solid, but lacked the energy that once made him magnetic. At the same time, his real-life persona added to the intrigue. Ford became known for his dry, sometimes confrontational interviews. He didn't play along with Hollywood's charm machine. In several press appearances, he appeared impatient or dismissive, especially when repeatedly asked about Han Solo. For fans, it was confusing. For Ford, it was simple. He had moved on, even if the world hadn't. Then came 2015. After years of distance, Ford made a shocking return to the franchise that defined him. Star Wars: The Force Awakens premiered in Los Angeles on December 14th. This time things were different. Ford didn't just return. He returned on his own terms, and finally, the long-standing tension reached its conclusion. Han Solo died. For decades, Ford had pushed for this outcome. He believed the character needed a meaningful ending. In The Force Awakens, that vision became reality. The death scene, killed by his own son, was one of the most emotionally charged moments in the entire Star Wars saga. This wasn't just storytelling, it was closure, but even that moment came with real-world danger. During filming at Pinewood Studios, Ford suffered a serious on-set accident when a hydraulic door from the Millennium Falcon set malfunctioned, crushing his leg. He was airlifted to a hospital and required surgery. Production was temporarily halted. At 71 years old, the incident raised serious concerns about his health and whether he should continue performing physically demanding roles. But Ford didn't stop. In 2017, he returned again, this time to another defining role. Blade Runner 2049 brought him back as Rick Decker decades after the original. The film, directed by Denis Villeneuve, was critically acclaimed, praised for its depth and visual storytelling. Yet again, a pattern repeated: critical success, commercial disappointment. It reinforced a long-standing irony in Ford's career. His most artistically respected work often reached smaller audiences, while his blockbuster roles overshadowed everything else. Then came one final return. In 2023, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny marked his last appearance as Indiana Jones. Filmed across locations including Sicily and London, the film aimed to close the chapter on one of cinema's most iconic adventures, but reception was mixed. Some praised the emotional weight. Others felt it came too late. And that brings us to the final paradox. Harrison Ford spent decades trying to escape the roles that made him famous, yet in the end, he returned to all of them, not because he was trapped, but because those roles became inseparable from who he was. That is the real curse. Not failure, not scandal, but success so powerful it defines you forever. And in Ford's case, that definition became both his greatest achievement and the one thing he could never fully leave behind.